Welcome to What's Real with Adrien. This is the live stream I do every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. It's what I like to say where I take the conversation a little bit deeper. This week we're going to be talking about seeing beyond your senses. I wrote a book, Seeing Beyond. It's properly placed here. And one of the central themes, actually the basic theme of the book, is that we have certain perspectives as human beings that we share, and these perspectives, they actually tend to limit us because they're limited in the way that we perceive them, that we go about understanding these perspectives. And the first one that I point out, because it's the most fundamental, is that we believe that we are our senses, that we take in the world through our senses, and therefore we interpret that as being who we are and what the world is. And what we're going to discover today, hopefully as we get into this conversation, is that this is a very limited way of thinking about our senses, and that they're actually there to show us something far greater. They're there actually to point us beyond. So before I get into the conversation, I like to say, please, if you enjoy these videos, hit the subscribe button, click that little bell icon that lets you know when I release new stuff. Like the video, leave a comment. These things are all very helpful, and I am greatly appreciative. If you're watching on Facebook, like my page, like the video. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you for that in advance. Seeing beyond your senses. If you're really honest with yourself, I think you'll have to admit, what is there beyond my senses? I mean, that's what life is, right? That's who I am in a way. Whatever comes in through my eyes and my ears and whatever I taste and smell and touch, that is reality. And therefore, how I interpret that is who I am. This is a very easily understandable thing to believe. But I'm hoping today that I can help broaden this perspective for you a bit so that you can see that there is more. And not only is there more, this is an infinitesimal speck of what is going on and who you are. So the way I start talking about it in the book is that I go about sharing how science has kind of slowly discovered its way to a similar notion. I talk about the fact that we used to think the world was flat, right? And that made perfect sense to our senses, to our observing world. When we looked out, I mean, sure, there were mountains and valleys and stuff, but it all sat on a flat plane, which was was proven to us by every time we hit a water, which we would, right? Eventually, if you kept walking or traveling, you hit some water, whether it's an ocean or a lake, and you look out and it's flat and it drops off into oblivion. So to all observing eyes, this is what the planet was, right? The next thing I talked about was the fact that we used to think that the sun revolved around us, right? And what could be more obvious? If we stood here on this planet and we looked up, it was easy to see that the sun revolved around us. And that if we stood out at night, not only did the sun, but the whole universe revolved around us. The next thing I like to point out in the book, or I pointed out, was the fact that, now, okay, this stuff we can maybe start to see that, we're learning some things, but that even solid objects, if you were standing, as I said in the book, if you were standing with somebody who was holding a stick in their hand about 200 years ago, and you said to them, that stick is actually 99.9999996% empty space. The guy or girl would have probably taken the stick, whacked you in the leg, and said, it looks pretty solid to me, right? I mean, this is not how our senses observe it, but we do know now, as we delve deeper through science, that these things are not as they appear. Now, the list of these things that we've discovered in science like that is very long. In other words, beliefs we had because our observations, our senses told us it was so, and then turned out to be not true at all, is a very long list. I share this because this is a way of trying to make sure that you are at least open a little bit to the fact that the way that you perceive the world and the way that you think that it is because of your senses may not be how it is. Now, obviously, we can't walk around paying our senses no mind, right? Otherwise, we'd walk into trees and walls and, step out into traffic and it would be a mess. So we're not talking about not giving them any credit. We're actually talking about acknowledging their limits and opening ourselves to the fact that there is indeed more. And as I said, a whole lot more. If you look at that concept of the fact that we now know that stick that somebody might be holding is 99.9% empty space, that is one of those things that I just love, right? Why? Because it's counterintuitive. Nothing that you can see about that could tell you that was true in a way. It's only through deep reflection from science, delving, creating instruments and all sorts of things to be able to look beyond our common senses that we discovered such a thing is true. The other thing I love about that specific one is it has proven that the inner world is as rich and as deep as what we think of as the outer world. In other words, the cosmos goes on forever, but it actually goes in forever in a way too. Now we haven't even gotten spiritual yet. We're talking about the material world. What I want to try to point to a little bit is the fact that this is equally true, if not more so, spiritually speaking. In other words, and another way that I talk about it in the book, is that the way that we use our senses, which is the way that we've talked about a little bit already, right? We just kind of take them at face value. The world is what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, what we smell. If that's the only way we take them, it's incredibly limited. And we come up with incredibly limited concepts of what they're about and what their purpose is. And the main one that we come up with, and I think that you'll know what I mean because if you look around and if you're honest with yourself, you'll see that this is the way that you use them and everyone around us does, right? We seek pleasure and we avoid pain. We start to believe that our senses are all about sense gratification. That the only purpose to life in a certain way is to feel good. Is to avoid pain, alter our environment. That's what we've become so very good at doing as human beings, right? And it's so admirable. I mean, it goes to show how incredible this sixth sense, which I didn't get into, and I'm not going to in this live stream, but the sixth sense, our mind, how powerful it is, right? It has come up with ways to completely control all our environments, not only in our house, right? As we travel, we get in a car, we can make the temperature just the way we want it, we can listen to just what we want, It's amazing. And we've done all this because in a certain way, we believe that is the ultimate goal of our senses. Now, as I go on to point to the fact that this is not true, or that this is limited, this is a limited way of thinking about our senses, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. Okay, I hope that that's really clear. There's nothing wrong with enjoying your senses. Matter of fact, I mean, they're given to us for a reason, and that's got to be part of it because they can be very enjoyable. It's just not the only one. So if we start, and it's actually a limited one, as I say, too, because if you start to pay attention to this impulse to seek sense gratification and avoid pain, you'll start to see that you become a slave to these things. This is why, as we step into the realms of spiritual stuff, I like to talk about the realms of subtlety and nuance, we start to also experience, at least as we go along, it takes a little bit of journeying into the territory, we start to discover more freedom. And that's because we start to be able to distance ourselves from these actually very primal urges. Right? There's nothing that elevated about wanting to eat something tasty or have sex or feel good and avoid pain, right? That's what every animal on this planet is doing. Nothing wrong with that. But is there nothing more to you than that? There is. There most certainly is, and you know that there is. This is part of the impulse that we have too, because we're always looking for something more, right? We're not just happy with that meal. Right? We always want something else, the ice cream after, or there's this inner urge. And that's because our senses are trying to show us something that most of us actually, are not really willing to look at. And this is the thing that I want to point out to you today. How to see beyond your senses. How to see what your senses are actually trying to show you so that you can see that there actually is a whole nother dimension to life beyond just these limited things. So if our senses aren't just about sense gratification or avoidance of pain, then what else could they be about? What are they trying to tell us? Well, some of this we know already, right? First of all, I'll point out the most obvious fact. Not all pain is bad, right? And not all pleasure is good. Anybody who's dabbled in drugs knows that, right? It can feel really good, but it leads to a holy mess. Not all pain is bad, right? Anybody who's worked out, there's always the pain, no gain kind of mentality, right? Anybody who's created a business or made for a good family knows that you have to endure a certain amount of pain. It's part of the territory. It's not all bad. Actually, plenty good comes from it. So this is right away just starting to turn a little bit. Can you feel it? Like that counterintuitive thing. This is just the slightest thing. The next is, once you start paying attention to that, you might begin to notice that what your senses are really trying to tell you is that this game of sense gratification, of pursuing pleasure at all cost and avoiding pain, is a losing game. Because none of it lasts. This is why it leads to slavery in a certain point, because you're always in pursuit of it. No pleasure lasts, and no avoidance of pain can last. These things naturally come and go. And if you pay attention to your senses, if you really pay attention, and you don't just get caught up in the game of chasing and running, right? You'll see this. This is a very well-known fact in Buddhism. It's called the law of impermanence. This is one of the first things that Buddha taught, was that everything, life is suffering was the terms that he used. That sounds very negative, right? But this is what he was pointing out. It's because nothing lasts. So if we're looking for that sense of fulfillment from our senses, we're going to be disappointed every time. Because they cannot give us a lasting sense of fulfillment. And they will show us that quite plainly when we pay attention. I remember when I realized this, the way that I'm trying to share it to you, it was earth-shattering in a certain way, right? Because it was like, crap, like I've spent all my time like this, and this isn't, I could see it. I could clearly see this is not what it's about. But then as I opened myself to that, I began to realize that there was so much more. And it was only until I was willing to let that go, right? As I love to say, like, you can't receive something new if you're always holding on to the same thing, right? This is why it's so important to allow things in and let them go, right? Because if we're holding, we can't receive. If I was holding on to this pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain, I would have never saw this deeper dimension to life. This deeper dimension to life is very similar to the realizing that the stick is 99.999996% empty space. When I let go, and of course, I don't want to oversell this. I still enjoy pleasure, right? And tend to avoid pain, of course. But as I let it go, as I was letting it go, as I continue to let it go, I start to experience something much deeper. It's the thing that I'm always trying to talk about. And as I talk about the three attributes, you might say, of the spiritual life, right? Freedom, joy, and peace. This is what actually lives outside of, or that's not exactly right? It's just like the stick. The stick is still there. You get whacked on the leg, it hurts. In a similar way, the senses matter. They're real in their own way, but there's so much more. There's so much more beyond that, and that is the realm of joy, peace, and freedom. The more I realized that I wasn't just a bundle of thoughts and emotions and desires, the more I was able to make different choices. The more I was able to pursue different things. Because before, I couldn't pursue certain things because they might get in the way of pursuing pleasure, right? Or avoiding pain. But once that wasn't my central focus anymore, the world began to open up in new ways. It's why I'm sitting here now. It's why my marriage with my wife is so much better than it ever was. And it was always pretty good. I mean, actually, we've had some really rough times, but I've always loved my wife deeply. But it only really began to blossom once I started to realize this simple thing, actually. Believe it or not. In the book I say, too, that if you just realize even one of these perspectives, in this book I talk about 3, there's 7 in all. I'm hoping to continue to put out new books till we cover all 7 of these perspectives. But if you can get just one of them, you'll see that your whole world begins to expand. And it's because even just this, you're not just a sensing animal. There's more to you than that. So much more. It's the 99.9. And actually, a lot of what you are is very similar to that stick. It's an openness. An emptiness. People don't like to hear that. It sounds negative in a way, but emptiness and openness go hand in hand, right? It's a place of joy and acceptance, peace, because there's not the chasing and running, avoiding, right? This is a real place. This is a real thing that I'm talking to you about. It's not hocus pocus. It's not some, unattainable thing. I think that's another thing that even if you've been interested in these sorts of things, I know I've had many conversations with people when I used to do a lot of office work about, we'd stumble into the territory or the concept of enlightenment, and people would be like, oh yeah, well, that's never going to happen for me. Why not? Why not? That's just a thought you have. In the deepest realms of spirituality, what a pure teacher will tell you is you're already experiencing it. You just don't even realize it. You're already totally immersed in it. You're just too busy thinking about and paying attention to all these little things, these senses, your smell, your touch, your taste, your sight, your sound. Now, these things can bring you deeper too, by the way. They do more than just tell you that life is impermanent also. But until you realize that that's one of their primary objectives is to show you the law of impermanence, it's going to be hard for you to delve even deeper into that. If you've ever practiced mindfulness, you might have stumbled on it a little bit, right? When you're really being mindful, You'll realize your senses, your colors will get richer, right? That's people talk about that all the time. Sounds will get, more intense, like you can just hear things better. You're more grounded, right? This is you entering into this other dimension. And again, it's real. And it doesn't just have to be every once in a blue moon. Seeing beyond your senses is a profound step in the evolution of humans. If we're going to ever get past where we are, we're going to need to be able to realize that there is more to life than chasing sense gratification and avoiding pain. The next one that and this is not on subject, but I just feel I want to say it because it's very closely, what's the word I'm trying to say? It's very closely related. The next thing that we really need to see as human beings is that life is not an either or choice. It's not either your senses are telling you everything is accurate, or telling you accurately, or you can't trust them at all. Do you see that? That's a certain way that the brain likes to make assumptions. Like it goes, well, either my senses is all there is, or I don't have to pay attention to them at all, or they don't mean, or I can't trust them at all, right? In order for us to evolve as a human being, we're going to really need to be able to stop that sort of binary, or in spiritual terms, dualistic thinking. It's very limiting. Just like believing that you're only your senses. Part of the journey that science took, and one of the reasons I love to talk about that, is it was a journey outside of ourselves in a certain way, right? Like, first it was realizing the world wasn't flat, and then that opened up new worlds, right? That we could actually sail out onto that ocean. You see it? Well, this is when journey inward, and you'll find a similar sort of thing. New dimensions, right? The other part of that was realizing that the universe quite literally didn't revolve around us, around our petty us. This is the spiritual term. This is the way you could take this metaphorically. I hope you're following me. Spiritually. That the world doesn't revolve around your petty little sense gratifications and worries about pain. There's a lot more to the world, and there's a lot more to you. And that if you journey inward, not just worrying about the senses, you'll find a vast universe available. You'll find that you've only been dealing with 0.00004% of yourself in a way, right? Because there's so much more to you. What this means in real terms, because I want it to be practical. I want it to be real for you. I don't want it to just be something that you hear and you think it's really cool or the guy's a whack job, one of the two things. I want you to be able to experience this for yourself. So first off, even though it's probably very obvious, I would assume it's probably pretty obvious that nothing lasts, right? But pay attention a little closer. I want to encourage you to pay attention a little closer to the fact that you're always chasing something. Why? It's not just your ego. There's an underlying impulse there, right? Because we're trying to prove something, we're trying to accomplish something, but it's also because it doesn't last. This pursuit is futile in a certain way. It's never going to fulfill you. I encourage you to you don't have to get downtrodden about this either. This isn't discouraging, actually. It's enlightening. It's opening a whole new world. Once you accept the fact that there's more than just or let me start with, once you accept the fact that this pursuit is not going to fulfill you, which we all know, right? We all know money can't buy you happiness, and that material goods aren't going to give you love, and We know these sorts of things. I switched those, I think. But we already know, but we don't really pay attention. We fall into the trap of still believing it, even though we know it's not true. So I'm just encouraging you, pay attention, watch. You'll see it every day in and day out. This is clarity. There's freedom in that. Because once you start to notice that, really, you can start to open to something else. The next something else is the deeper side, the true you, as I always like to say, the capital S self. This is the part of you that is, as I say, is utterly still and silent. It's also the 99.999 space of you. The fact that you don't notice this part of yourself because it doesn't ask anything of you. It only asks, actually, that you notice it. The moment you notice this part of yourself, this very quiet, still space inside of you, everything begins to shift. Seeing beyond your senses happens immediately in a certain way. This is what I'm saying about mindfulness, right? Maybe we could talk about mindfulness as a simple way of approaching what I'm trying to share with you. What is mindfulness? It's just paying attention to what you're doing right now. If you're listening to my voice right now, if you're watching this video, don't do anything else. Just be here with me right here, right now. That's it. If you're having another thought, let it go. Come back with me. Come back with me here in this moment. This is mindfulness. If you do this enough, you'll start to experience life in a new way. The colors will get brighter. The sounds will become richer. Things will taste better, actually. This is funny too, right? Are you noticing this is all our senses, but they get enhanced in a certain way. And that's only because you're actually pulling awareness into them. You're not scattered all over the place. There's more to you than this also, but this is a fantastic place to start, to begin to taste that there's more going on, that there is something beyond your senses, beyond what you commonly hold as your reality. Every time you do this, every time you pull in, and are you with me still? Are you with me here now? Are you listening? Are you watching? If you're only listening, whatever you're looking at, are you looking at it? Allowing it in? Not trying to do anything with it, but just opening? Every time you do that, you start to tap into something far deeper. You start to accustom yourself to something. You start to, that's not exactly the right word, familiarize yourself actually with something else. Something that you failed to notice in the past. It was always there. It was always there. But you weren't paying any attention to it. This is seeing beyond what can be seen. That was actually the original title to the book. It was just too wordy, right? This is seeing beyond what can be seen. If that doesn't make any sense to you, how can I see beyond what can be seen? I ask that you be quiet for a few minutes with me here. Be still with me for a few minutes. You're not trying to do anything. You're just here. This is awareness. This is consciousness. The more that you open beyond your sensing world, it doesn't mean that you leave your senses. It's just that all of a sudden you begin to realize there's a whole lot more. I like to think of it, I've talked about this before. I did this in one of my live talks, I believe. That consciousness, because this is what we're talking about, is a giant field. It's the field of peace, joy, and freedom, believe it or not. And it's there. It's all around. It's like sunlight, I think I explained it at one point. It gets everywhere, even in caves where you don't see sunlight, right? You don't see certain rays are still getting down in there, right? It's like that. Consciousness is everywhere. Everywhere. Awareness is like a lens, right? It's like a lens that focuses that sunlight, you could say, right? That consciousness. And you are awareness. You're consciousness too, but you're experiencing it like a focal, like that lens focusing it, right? And how you normally experience your life is like when you take that lens and you dial in that sunbeam and you start burning a hole in wood or something like that, right? You can set something on fire with it, right? It's focused. This is how we normally live our lives, though. That is a tiny speck. And honestly, most of us focus, and it's very broad. We're not burning anything. We're not really accomplishing much of anything, not to be mean, but it's just that we're kind of broad, right? We haven't dialed that in where it's like a laser, so to speak. But it's dialed into a certain part of our lives. And what we've taken in is this dimension of space and time, right? Our senses. If you focus that in a little bit and then you turn it back on itself, this is what meditation is all about. This is even what mindfulness can be about if you open enough. You start to experience awareness, that it's more the lens, if you will, right? You can start to feel consciousness streaming through you. If you go even beyond that, if you can open even more, if you can let go of the lens, so to speak, then you're really getting into the 99.99. You're really opening and you're experiencing consciousness. This is the oneness experience that all deep spiritual teachers, this is the kingdom of heaven is at hand that Jesus was talking about. Within. Go within. This is what he was pointing to. This field of awareness of consciousness. This is what's registering all your senses. This is, my friend, this is who you really are. Not somebody, or not just somebody who likes chocolate ice cream and doesn't like vanilla ice cream, right? Not just somebody who likes this sort of, movie and doesn't like, not somebody who's a Democrat and not a Republican, or not that. Not just that. All these things are useful in their way, right? Necessary even in a way, but very limited. To expand this first perspective of your senses is to realize and to begin, I went really far here today, but is to begin to realize this other dimension that is more real than any of the limited perspectives we've had on it before. I'm not sure where we are because I really got lost in myself here, but there's probably no question. Are there any questions? I highly encourage you to see beyond what can be seen. To see what, if anything, I said just made sense, and what, if anything, is beyond your senses. I think you'll find it's an incredible place. As always, I thank you for your time. It's precious.